Over there, Suzette. This is tape number 3, question 21. Why have we gone through so much manager-labor strife in this country over the past several decades?
Well, because management and labor wanted two different things. They were pulling at opposite ends. I think we have to go back and ask ourselves, where did the labor movement in this country start? And it really started in those companies that did not answer their employees' needs, and in some cases were abusive of those employees. So we're dealing with non-responsive management. And to take it a step further, we're also talking about non-responsive capitalism. And the unions grew out of that. However, once the union movement started sweeping across the country, it even took over companies that were responsive. However, the union movement itself said, we have to have everybody in this industry unionized if we're going to be effective. Unfortunately, they were probably correct in that thinking. And there was a lot of management-labor strife created through the bloody beginnings of the union movement, and it just perpetuated. There's a tremendous quote from Gay Talese's book Honor Thy Father, in which a young man, maybe in his 20s, looks at his father's advisor and asks, what's going on? Why am I involved in my father's business, and why am I involved in his wars? And the answer was, we young men always fight their father's battles. And that's what's going on even today. And unfortunately, there are still, in some organizations, radical elements left of those early strifes.
I was about to ask if perhaps some of the difficulty is a result of overreaction.
Yes. Yes, there's always the fear factor involved, and we overreact. We happen to think if we're management people that all unions are bad, and we feel if we're union people that all management teams are against us. That's not the fact at all. There are some excellent companies out there that know what to do with their employees from top to bottom. There's some excellent unions out there which in fact represent their membership and are concerned about the health and welfare of the companies they work for.
But we're having difficulty overcoming our history.
Absolutely. We're not very unique, are we? The Orientals have a claim that goes like this: time heals all wounds, and wounds all heals. And that's part of the process here.
What do you feel management's most critical skills are?
The absolute number one skill that I know a manager must have in order to succeed, he or she has to be good at coaching and counseling. And that's something that management does not stress that much to subordinate managers. The ability to communicate with people, get them to modify a behavior, correct something that's going wrong. That's coaching and counseling. It's a form of training, if you will. However, the interesting thing that happens is most managers, when they go to correct an employee, do more damage than good. Another critical skill, delegating. How do I give another person an order without offending them, wounding their pride, damaging their ego? Another critical skill, personal management. Personal management, time management. If you consider the amount of effort and the little time we have to accomplish what we need to do, that's an important skill. A fourth one, basic communications. How do I get my idea across to you? A fifth, every manager should have a course in basic salesmanship, because a manager is a salesperson. They have to sell their credibility, they have to sell their ideas up and down the ladder every day. Of course, the most difficult way to have to sell, the most difficult direction in which to sell an idea is not up or down the organization, but across to another peer. I would list those as the 5 most important ones.
Having enumerated those skills, if you asked 100 managers if they possessed those skills, would they think they did?
In the surveys we've done with about 1,000 managers over the past decade, most of them feel that they communicate well. They do a fair job of coaching and counseling and time management, but they don't see themselves as being great sellers of ideas, which sort of contradicts the idea that they're a good communicator. So the answer is we get mixed responses, but none of them seem to be totally satisfied with their skills in those 5 areas.
That's positive, isn't it?
It's positive if they're willing to do something about it.
Are most companies interested in allowing, even encouraging, their managers to develop those 5 skills?
No. Most companies will give the lip service. They'll tell you, we want you to be a better this, or we want you to be a better that. But I always ask, will you give them the time off? IBM is willing to. IBM, for every 12 months of work, gives almost a month of training to some of its people. In American management, as I may have mentioned earlier, chokes when they hear that they should put their people in the classroom for a minimum of 6 to 12 days a year.
We can't afford to have our managers away. You say you can't afford not to have your managers away learning.
That's true. I find it interesting that we're willing to ask somebody who doesn't know how to do a job to do it without training. And the idea that we're going to give this person the proper tools with which to do a job, but it'll take time away from his job, is outrageous. I asked the average CEO one question. How would you feel if you had to go in for brain surgery and found out that the surgeon has had no practice or formal education before meeting your brain that morning? But we're willing to do that with our managers. We do a terrible thing to our managers in America. You know what we ask them to do? We ask them to do a job in which we are not willing to prepare them for. And then a very sad thing happens. Only the strong, only the wise survive. Now, I use the word wise very loosely because the wise may be wise politically speaking, not managerially skills speaking. And so that person who is pretty street savvy regarding how the company works will go out there and make it up the ladder. Meanwhile, we may have passed over the opportunity of promoting a tremendous manager, but because we did not give this person the skills, training necessary, they fall by the wayside.
As we move from an industrial to a service economy, what impact, what effect will that have on American managers, in your opinion?
Can I answer? I don't know. This is a tough one. We're going through a great change, and we're so close to it right now. I honestly don't believe anyone can answer that question well. We do find in certain segments of the country managers becoming more quality of life oriented. We see in other sectors of the country managers behaving the same way in the service industry that they behaved in the industry, in industrial production. I would like to think that we're becoming more human in our approach, inasmuch as we're dealing more with humans than we are with machines. But I'm not certain, especially with the advent and the usage of the computer. The computer has been touted as being something that will save us from many of the problems that we are facing as managers today. However, the paperless computer has not come into play yet. And the thing that bothers me just a tinge is that we've worked very hard to develop the computer and the technological skills of our managers. But if we haven't developed their human skills, they're still not going to be the complete manager that our companies need.
So here you answer questions. It prompts 100 others right on the spur of the moment. Here's one. A while ago, you suggested Japan had a role model, or at least had someone to look at, that is the United States, in how they're managing, learn from the mistakes. Have we seen historically any other country go from an industrial to a service-based economy? Do we have anyone to learn from?
Yes and no. The Swiss went from an industrially based economy to a service-oriented economy. The Swiss lost their dominance in given industries such as clockmaking and watchmaking to the Japanese, to the Taiwanese, and so on. And Switzerland was a country of small businesses and turned into a very service-oriented economy. The problem we have with using Switzerland as a role model is the dynamics are very different, because we didn't go from a nation of small businesses to a service economy, from small industries to a service economy. We're going from a country of large industrial complexes to now large service complexes.
Do you think that, let me rephrase, how long do you think that it takes to develop a person into a good manager?
If we were to look at an average, it takes about 5 to 7 years. You're not going to build a manager in a year or two. That's impossible. Let's take a look at the skill demands. As I mentioned earlier, the person has to be a coach, a counselor, a trainer, a time manager, an expediter, and so on. With training, a manager can be developed in 5 to 7 years. Without training, where that individual has to rely on his own skills, we're looking at a good 10 years. And that 3 to 5 year difference can spell the death knell for organizations who haven't taken the time and the effort to develop their people.
In your opinion, are the business leaders aware of the developmental time involved?
No, only because they haven't made it a study. They haven't really made it a point to examine what it takes to build, or the time, or the money.
There's been an economic price to be paid for that lack of understanding of that development time, then. If someone were going into management today, what would you recommend that they do to become successful? Let's start that again. There was some microphone noise. If someone's going into management today, what would you recommend they do to become successful?
The first thing I would suggest they do is find out what management is all about before they decide they want to become a manager. It's not a glorious position that has power and all sorts of trappings that come with the title. They have to make sure they're suited for the position, temperamentally, values-wise, behaviorally. The next thing I recommend is that they learn the rules of the organization. They have to learn what the people politics are of their company, and ask themselves, Can I play by those rules? The third thing they have to do is develop their people skills, communications, motivations, and so on, along with their technical and administrative skills. And the fourth thing they're going to have to do is summon the courage to attack all the sides of management. Most managers are only willing to deal with the easy problems, the things problems. And yet we have far more people problems than things problems.
Don't we have a great deal of difficulty, though, getting the appropriate training to overcome the people problems?
We do when our companies are not interested in overcoming the people problems. You know, interest in overcoming any problem doesn't mean that we're going to talk about it. It means we're going to talk about it and do something about it. One of the things corporate America has to do is budget training and development into the cost of doing business. Because until that happens, our companies are not going to prosper as well as they possibly could.
Ready for a silly question?
Sure.
Are presidents of the organizations supposed to be managers?
Yes. Yes, a president of an organization is supposed to be a manager. However, he is not supposed to be managing second-line managers. He is supposed to be managing the process that flows between his executive team. Those are the only people he is supposed to manage. The problem is when you're a hands-on manager working day to day with all these people and dealing with exciting things, it's not as much fun just managing your vice presidents. And too many presidents who were perhaps the vice president of finance or the vice presidents of marketing or whatever their titles were before they became president make a mistake of still trying to manage that department over, through, or around the VP that replaces them in that role. They are supposed to be managers. I'm sad to say that too many publicly held corporations, the president of the organization is really a caretaker more than he is a manager.
What's the net effect of over-managing and under-managing by the president?
Well, the net effect, if you over or under manage, is probably going to be the same. However, if you are fortunate enough to have an exceptional team working for you and you undermanage, you probably will do a better job because you're allowing those people to do the job right. If you overmanage, the consequences are probably much greater personally than they are corporately speaking. High blood pressure, strokes, heart attacks, and a golf game that is ridiculous.
The chairman of the board, is he or she supposed to be a manager?
Yes and no. Here we go again. He's really supposed to be a consultant to the organization. He is also, if he's going to manage, responsible of managing one person and one person only, and that's called the president of the company. Now, there's a number of people who are hearing our voices right now who are having serious problems with that particular answer. However, that's what is supposed to be occurring. What happens in real life is another issue.
Is the chairman of the board apt to be silent or apt to be too involved in the management?
If the chairman of the board also happens to be the owner, he probably is a hands-on manager as well. If the chairman of the board is really elected by the board, he's an outsider, it's a publicly held company, there's more of a chance that he will act at the role of chairman of the board as he is supposed to act.
Many women, many minorities are coming into the job market now. In your view, what is the impact of women and minorities entering management on the American management scene?
I think it is having some great impacts. we're going to be seeing more and more women, more and more minorities involved in management roles. The first thing that affects that I've noticed is confusion. How does a male subordinate deal with a female manager? How does a middle manager deal with a first-line female manager, and so on? The legal profession is having terrible times with this. Women are now outnumbering men in many law schools as applicants. And there's a ton of women coming out of these law schools as working professionals. However, they're not being granted the partnership role in major law firms that they should be being granted. I think the same thing is going on in corporate America. We're in a transitional period. Now remember, the Chinese, if they wanted to curse you, would say, may you be born in an era of transition, and that's what we're facing right now. So we're in a sort of a confused state. The impact's going to be great. It is great. Can I define it well? No, I can't define it well, but I will say this much regarding that impact, that it will lessen with time. For many of the executive female managers have adopted the male-oriented rules to make it to where they are. And if they maintain that attitude and those rules, we're just going to see the same type of corporation and the same type of attitude being extended, because their role models were, of course, people who established the rules to begin with.
Will there be long-term benefit from this short-term turmoil or transition?
Yes, there will be. There will be. And that long-term benefit is going to be acceptance of people on merit, not by race or by sex.
This is an unfair question. I love unfair questions.
Okay.
Who's better equipped to be a manager in your view, a man or a woman?
That's an unfair question. First of all, it depends on their skills, their intent, their personality, their drives. You know, before you hire a person, there's 6 critical things you must know about them. The first thing you need to know about them are, what are their values? Can this job fulfill their values? Now, what are values? Values are things dealing with their drive to make money, their drive to achieve power. A third is theoretical drive, aesthetic, religious, in other words, to do things by the book, a traditionalist. And the last drive we generally speak about is social drive, concern for other people. Is that person's values going to be satisfied by the job, by the company? For if they can't, that person will take the job and become very frustrated. The second thing we have to know about them is their personality, their behavior. Do they have the right type of personality to deal with a managerial role? Do they have the patience that it takes to make a good manager? Are they forward-thinking? And so on. The third factor that we have to look at is their intelligence level. Now, we always want to hire the smartest person for a job. Unfortunately, if it's a mundane managerial position, that extremely intelligent person will become bored in a hurry. So we have to make sure that they're the right IQ level. Not too smart, not too dumb. Fourth area is emotional stability. Are they people who can deal with the pressures of management at the level we're trying to promote them into? The fifth thing, are they flexible? Can they bring their experience from other positions to this one and make them work? For these first 5 items, we can test the applicant for. However, the most important item is item number 6. And that one deals with desire. It's the most important, and you cannot test for desire. You have to put the person on the job, and you have to find out, can he or she cut the mustard as a manager? Now, the fascinating thing is you can hire the right person in all 6 areas. They're on the job for 6 months, and lo and behold, a tragedy befalls them. For instance, the loss of a mate, a divorce, a major operation. Now, whether you tear an organ out of a person's body or you rip a person out of their life, the consequences are basically the same. What are the consequences? Pain. Emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. And the problem is, it takes us about a year to deal with the conscious pain after a divorce, death of a loved one, or a major operation. But what we rarely realize, it takes a second year to deal with the unconscious pain. And this impacts our productivity. Too often, it impacts our productivity negatively. Just because someone works more hours to blunt conscious pain does not mean he or she will give us a better return for our investment.
Hiring a manager then becomes a fairly dicey affair regardless.
Yes, it does. And the problem we have here is if we're hiring a manager from the outside, we rarely use scientific methods to help our intuitive skills. Unfortunately, too many times in too many organizations, people are hired based upon 3 interviews, logic, and a mighty high-o-silver. It's the best guess type of situation. He went to the right school. She carried the right briefcase. He said the right things. She looks the part. None of these are a good reason to hire somebody into management. And if we promote them up the ladder, too many times, we promote them for the wrong reason. We promote them because they agree with us, they don't intimidate us, seniority, or because they did a terrific job at that lower level. Those are not good reasons to hire or promote people into the management world.
Assume for a moment the manager was hired for the right reasons. What does it take then for that manager to become successful?
Skill development on every level, on the human resource side, on the technical side, on the administrative side. Education, more education, but not education for education's sake, but looking for practical information which can help them excel on the job. Getting closer to their employees, really working on solving problems at the employee level, working very hard within the organization to solve problems between departments. We don't seem to be breeding managers who get people to work well together or who get departments to work well together. We seem to promote people who look good, say the right things, and write beautiful memos.
How does a company impact on a manager's success?
Oh, tremendous. Tremendous. I think the 2 most important things to a person's success are obviously his desire to succeed, and secondly, the obstacles that he runs into. I have met so many managers who are spiritually dead because they have a boss who sits on them, or because they have an organization which does not allow them to succeed. Before a person takes a job on with any company in a managerial position, I always talk about 3 things that the company is going to extend to them, that they must have full knowledge of to determine whether they will succeed or not. And the 3 most critical things in a manager's role with a company are accountability, responsibility, and authority. Those 3 have to be balanced. Accountability really means, who do I report to? What do I answer for? Who do I answer for? Do I report to a committee? Do I report to one boss? Or am I matrixed? Do I talk to 3 bosses? Being matrixed is like being a little bit pregnant. The second thing happens to be responsibilities. What are you responsible for? Who are you responsible for? Does your job description clearly state that? And does your boss recognize that job description as being your job? Or does he or she have fantasies about all these other things you're supposed to do, including making the coffee in the morning? The third happens to be authority. That is the critical one. Do you have enough power to carry out your responsibilities? The answer usually is no. And if you don't have a balance amongst these 3 areas, you are destined to fail.
I want to give you an opportunity to start a great debate. Who epitomizes managerial success in America today?
No one. I haven't seen a manager who I think epitomizes success. I have seen individuals who, based upon their companies, their circumstances, their area of the country, would epitomize success. But I've thrown so many qualifiers in. For instance, Mary Kay Ash of Mary Kay Cosmetics is terrific where she's working at, with the type of people she's working with, the product that and the service that she's providing the world. I don't think Mary Kay Ash would be as good at General Electric or the United States Postal Service. I would say the same for our well-known personality of Lee Iacocca. Lee Iacocca, in my mind, was definitely born for the job that he is doing. And I would say the same thing of Mayor Koch of New York City. But I don't think Lee Iacocca or Major Koch would have succeeded at Westinghouse or Alcoa, for the rules are very different there. And the circumstances, and the times, in the cities we are talking about are very, very different. So, is there a role model? No.
You've spoken of 3 distinct types of managers. Let's enumerate and elaborate on those types.
Well, there's 3 types of people who get involved in management. One happens to be a manager type, a second is called the administrator, and a third is a leader. Now, there's big differences between these types of people. Let's start out with the administrator.
Yeah.
The administrator is someone who deals well with things, papers, machines, processes, policies. He doesn't deal well with people. He's a good expediter, but again, he's working at a things, not a people level. A manager is one who is able to work with both things and people. Now, a manager may not be very inspirational and may be a terrible leader, but he can manage a process and people to the degree where things are done. The third one is a leader. This is an individual who happens to be extremely persuasive, extremely inspirational, and he can get people to move and do things. Interestingly enough, a leader may be a terrible manager, maybe a rotten administrator, but he's very inspirational. If I may cite some American presidents, and I beg of my listeners to please accept one fact, that I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. I'm an independent voter. So therefore I won't take sides. But if you look at Presidents Reagan and Presidents Kennedy and President Roosevelt, both Roosevelts, you will find that these gentlemen We're all leaders. As for their managerial skills, I hold those in question. As far as their administrative skills, terrible. If we take a look at administrators, we would definitely be looking at people such as President Eisenhower, such as President Carter, President Ford, and probably strike that. We'll let it out. But if we were to look at pure managers, probably the only two that stick out in my mind in that concept were Presidents Truman and a person he didn't like very much, President Nixon.
Having given the three types, haven't even given examples of those. Who's in control of large American companies today?
As a general rule of thumb, there's no one particular body of people or individuals in control of American companies. Certainly the shareholder is not in control of the company. The CEO, if it's a publicly held company, may be dictated to by the board of directors, but the board of directors set down very, very broad type of policies and standards. You really have to look at what runs the company, not so much who runs the company. Is the company a market-driven company? In other words, the market dictates certain needs and that company responds well to it. Or is it a product-driven company, which means that our companies produce a given product and we don't care whether you need it or not. We're going to sell it to you, period. A third type of company, and far too many, are operations-driven. Operations companies do something extremely well, and that's what makes them successful. They could care less about what the market needs are. They could care less about what the product is. They're just operationally very, very well equipped. Now, since the advent of the corporate raiders, there are some companies that are also profit-driven. They could care less about the market, about the quality of the product, about the operations. Their only concern with is money. So if you were to ask me who's in control, I couldn't identify that for you. But if you were to ask me what controls it, I would look at those categories.
Would the answer be the same if I were to ask about the small American companies?
Oh, no. If it's a small company, if we're talking about an entrepreneurship, whether it be a company doing $7,000 a year or an entrepreneurship doing $100,000 a year, although most of us don't realize that there are entrepreneurships that size and larger, yes, I can tell you who runs that, and that's the entrepreneur. And the reason is because it's his or her money that's on the line. It's his or her blood, sweat, and tears. For you will find amongst entrepreneurs, too many, I'm sad to say, that company is more important to them than their spouses and or lovers, more important than their children, more important than their social activities or their athletic activities. As a matter of fact, for far too many entrepreneurs, the only child, lover, friend, or activity they know, eat, breathe, and sleep is their business.
If we assume President Reagan as a leader of the three types of managers, and if we assume the president controls American government, and I'm not sure that's exactly true, but let's make that assumption, what does that say for the direction of American business today?
Well, American business is becoming more sensitive to the need to become more export-oriented. And that is not so much the tone that is set by the president. The tone that has been set by the president has been one that business is not going to deal with any nuisances, be it union nuisance or federal government meddling in private sector activities. So what the influence has been on business by the Reagan administration has been one of a laissez-faire type of government, and it has worked by and large. We've seen more companies buying other companies. The big fish are eating the medium-sized fish. The medium-sized fish are eating the small fish, and the small fish are happy to be at as long as it gives them a profit.
Final point. As you look at America's management and economic situation and the world factors, are you optimistic in the long term?
I'm optimistic in the long term. I'm also the first to say that we're going to have to better define what it is that we do. When we're called in to work with a company, we find a very fascinating thing occurring. We find that we're called in by one of three types of companies. One company maybe wants to make a better profit. A second type of company wants to become more professional and better at what it does. And the third company perhaps his back is up against the wall and they're asking us to come in and produce some kind of miracle. Regardless of the particular situation, we're dealing with companies that have to face a very threatening subject called change. Am I optimistic? Yes. But I'm also the first to say we're going to go through a lot more pain before it gets better.